Hey friends, so my last video on toroids reawakened an old debate that's actually been raging for more than a decade. Are antibend toroids actually a thing? Which, for the record, yes, they are. But I also understand the confusion. They require several leaps in logic that are not super intuitive, and today, I'm here to help. Drex here from Drex Factor Poi, sharing with you the love of poi spinning and flow arts to benefit your body and brain. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about why many people over the years have had a hard time wrapping their minds around antibend toroids, myself included. But before we dive in, I want to give a quick shout out to the friends of the channel. Big thanks to Darkmonk, Fire Mecha, Flowfests, Flow Toys, Juggling Calling, Pyroterra Light Toys, Spinballs, and Ultrapoi for helping to make the videos on this channel possible. You can learn more about all of these awesome companies and the work that they're doing to support flow artists like yourself by checking out the links that I have down in the description of this video. And special thanks to the non-business friends of the channel, Lain Mochinsky and Pekha Pekkonen. Thank you both so much for supporting my channel, my work, and my mission. Toroids represent a pretty infamous period in tech poi history. Lots of people don't particularly care for how they look, and the nomenclature around them can be really confusing, if not controversial. So much so that several people over the years have suggested that antibends in particular are either poorly named or don't exist at all. And you know what? They're in good company, because I didn't understand antibends at first either. Back when I was first learning toroids in 2010, I made several videos outlining why I was baffled by the concept and challenging the idea of whether there could be such a thing as a toroid that was equivalent to an antispin flower. And I was wrong. But I was also lucky in that I had some patient friends who were willing to talk me through what I was missing, and now I want to pay it forward for all the other skeptics out there. Real quick, if you want to see more poi action, please make sure to like and subscribe so you can see my videos as I post them. Thanks in advance. So, housekeeping real quick. What do the terms toroid and antibend mean, and why are they so confusing? Toroids are a subset of poi tricks centered around plane bending in such a way that the plane of the poi is nearly always seen edge on from the perspective of the audience. We describe them coming in three varieties: isobend, antibend, and probend, that correspond roughly to extension, antispin, and inspin flowers in traditional 2D poi spinning. And it's here that we find one of the more common criticisms of toroids, and frankly, the first one that I raised myself. See, it's easy to tell the difference between inspin and antispin flowers because we can keep the poi spinning and either spin our hand in the same direction or the opposite one. When the poi and hand move in the same direction, we have inspin flowers, and when they move in opposite directions, we have antispin flowers. But in antibend toroids, it seems like no matter which direction I move my hand in, the poi is spinning the same way. So how can these be considered a counterpart to antispin then? But that's not the only common criticism of antibend toroids. Here's another frequent one. When someone learns how to do an antibend toroid, there are parts of it that don't feel terribly different from an isobend. If I were to just do a single bend, is this an antibend or an isobend? What's really the difference here? As different as these complaints are, they actually spring from a really similar place. There's a fundamental misunderstanding of both what the term means as well as the movements that they're describing. And to clear things up, we're going to need to start off by clarifying one central idea that may be kind of hard to wrap our minds around. What if I told you the naming convention of toroids aren't really centered around describing the movement of the poi themselves? See, what the terms isobend, antibend, and probend are describing has less to do with the movement of the poi itself, and more to do with the movement of the plane that the poi is spinning in. If that sounds like kind of a strange way to describe a poi move, that's because it is. To understand why toroids are named this way, I want to give you a little bit of history as to where these terms came from, and I hope it'll explain what they're actually describing and why the convention exists in the first place. So let's turn back the clock to 2010 and a guy by the name of Charlie Cushing. Now, if you're familiar with Charlie, it's likely because of his work with 9 square theory or as the founder of prop manufacturer Lanternsmith. And it's in 9 square theory that Charlie tried to fix one of the oldest problems in poi terminology. As I discussed in my video about how we count flower petals, poi flowers kind of suffer from a lack of precision in what the nomenclature around them actually describes. There isn't a single falsifiable definition for a flower petal, and because of that, there's a lot of controversy around what constitutes a 1 or 2 petal antispin flower. And so, Charlie sought to clarify matters by creating an entirely new set of terms with clear definitions attached to them. Flowers no longer had petals. They had regions where the poi spun inside the handpath, called lobes, and regions where they spun outside the handpath, called antilobes. And the flowers themselves? Why is it that antispin is the opposite of inspin rather than, say, outspin, for example? Charlie instead suggested the use of 3 terms to describe poi flowers. Isospin flowers, single beat flowers where the poi and hands are locked in unison. Depending on the phasing of the hand and the poi head, these result in either extensions or isolations. Prospin flowers, that is, flowers in which the poi complete more beats than the hand and they spin together in the same direction. This effectively was a replacement for the term inspin. And the one term that didn't change at all? Antispin. What can I say? It just has a great ring to it. But we would now have terms that would directly reflect what their meaning was in relation to each other. Pro versus anti, way more intuitive than in versus anti. And if you know anything at all about poi spinning in the past decade, you will know that this new system for naming poi flowers did not catch on at all. But one thing it did become useful for was naming toroids. Here it's helpful to remember that the term toroid is actually short for toroidal flower. Back in the day, as we were exploring plane bending moves that involved a circular hand path, our clearest point of comparison was with traditional flowers. But how exactly do we go about applying those concepts in a context where basic rules of timing and direction seem to be breaking down? Well, Charlie and another friend named Ted Petrosky had an idea, and it involved a little bit of abstraction. It's long been a problem in the prop spinning world that the ways we talk about flowers when spinning a staff are slightly different than when we talk about poi. Antispin is still antispin and inspin is still inspin, but the shapes they each produce are radically different depending upon the prop. Staff antispin flowers are very linear and produce petals at each end of the prop, while poi antispin flowers are very round and only produce petals at the performer's thumb end. So is there any way that we can make a poi flower more linear to match up more closely with the appearance of a staff flower? Actually, there is indeed. Toroids. Most modern poi technique is about presenting the audience with the full profile of the poi's movement, creating round shapes that fill up the space around us, and defaulting all poi tricks to wall plane. But what if instead we were to face the poi plane toward the audience, flattening down the poi's motion such that it appears to be moving back and forth along a straight line? Now the plane of the poi itself becomes a more linear object like the staff. And now all of a sudden we can think of the movement of that poi plane as being analogous to the movement of the staff. If this is a little challenging to visualize, think of it this way. As the poi spins around in space, we're keeping track of all the points that it moves through in its path. If we don't move our hand, they wind up looking a lot like a hula hoop, a circle hovering in space. We can then turn the hoop towards the audience so that they see the hoop as just a straight line rather than a circle. We can then use that line like we would a staff, spinning it in spin or anti-spin relative to the movement of the hand. So, the terms isobend, antibend, and probend are all describing the movement of the poi plane as though it were a staff. And this can lead to some confusion. We don't need to stall a staff in order to switch the direction it's spinning in, and that's true of the poi plane in toroids as well. Many people get confused as to why the type of toroid doesn't change when they switch the direction their hand is spinning in. The reason is because they're also switching the direction the poi plane is spinning in too. Because they don't actually need to stall the poi in order to make this change, the switch is transparent to them, and most don't even realize that they're doing it. I find it sometimes helpful to frame things this way. We have a specific word for antibend. That is, we don't refer to these toroids as antispin toroids because we're no longer paying attention to the direction the poi is actually spinning in. What you bend with the poi is a plane, hence antibend toroids. Oh, right, and then there's the question of whether a single bend is an isobend or an antibend, and the answer there is... well, actually there isn't one. Here's why. I'm going to move my hand back and forth in a straight line and let the poi spin around it. So let me ask you, is this anti-spin or in-spin? Well, the short answer is it's neither. since my hand isn't actually following a round hand path. There's no direction of rotation to compare the poi's movement to. If I wanted to, I could expand the pattern out to make it anti-spin, or I could expand it out to make it in-spin. But just by itself, there's not enough information to say. The same thing is true for toroids. If I'm just bending at the same spot as I move my hand back and forth, my hand isn't spinning, and therefore my poi plane can't spin relative to it either. I think it's helpful to keep in mind that the term anti-bend in itself doesn't describe how a poi plane bends. It's an emergent property of the movement of the hand as it swings through space and how the poi plane spins relative to that. As a point of comparison, if I just spun my poi and asked if it was an anti-spin or an in-spin, the question comes off as nonsensical. Anti-spin is an adjective describing a flower, not a noun. Anti-bend works the same way. So, to summarize, anti-bend is a real thing despite what Drex from a decade ago and what many other people have believed over the years. And it's definitely a bit confusing because it requires quite a lot of abstraction and visualization of the poi and the poi plane's movement, to say nothing of borrowing ideas from other props to complete this picture. And the naming convention is based in an obscure attempt to overhaul the terms around poi flowers. Because that naming convention never really took off, it also means that what should have been an intuitive leap from one type of flower to another now has an unintentional linguistic barrier between them. But through it all, toroids are still super cool, and Antibend Toroids especially so. I really appreciate Charlie and Teddy for coming up with a way to classify a type of poitrix that most of us were struggling to wrap our heads around, and for being very patient with me as I struggled to understand what those terms really meant. Hopefully, I have honored both of their time by teaching others what they taught me. Did this video help to clear things up for you on Antibend Toroids? Please leave me a comment and let me know if you have any additional questions. Next month, I'll also be dropping my long-awaited video on Probend Toroids, so keep an eye out. If you got anything out of this video, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to help other people find it, to keep the conversation going, and to help my channel grow. This video would not be possible without the kind support of all of these awesome people right here. These are my Flow patrons, and they, along with the Padawans listed down in the description, make my channel and all my videos possible by supporting my work on Patreon. Thank you one and all for your very generous support. If you dig my content and want to see me make more of it, please consider signing up to support my work over at patreon.com/DrexFactorPoi. You can follow the link down in the description of this video or the card that just popped up if you're watching on YouTube. There you can get access to my videos the day before the rest of the world, bite-sized weekly lessons that get delivered straight to your email inbox, and a whole host of other awesome rewards. And even better, you'll be helping me spread the love of flow arts far and wide. Do give it a look, please, and thank you. If you'd like to learn more about poi toroids, I've got a playlist of videos I've done on the topic, linked to down in the description as well as up here on screen if you'd like to check them out. Also, the YouTube algorithm thinks that you might like this top video here based upon your past viewing habits, so maybe give that a look as well. Thanks so much for watching, make sure to get outside and flow today, and I'll see you with a new video real soon. Peace.